Welcome to Ask the Doctor, writing about protest. Writing effectively and successfully about protest, like all good writing, requires some knowledge and thought. This means starting with definitions. What do the dictionaries tell us about the word? Well, firstly, that we mainly encounter it as a noun or a verb. The Cambridge Online Dictionary gives us the following. As a noun, a strong complaint expressing disagreement, disapproval, or opposition, an occasion when people show that they disagree with something by standing somewhere, shouting, carrying signs, etc. As a verb, to show that you disagree with something by standing somewhere, shouting, carrying signs, etc. To say something forcefully or complain about something. And dictionary.com adds to our understanding of protest. As a noun, an expression or declaration of objection, disapproval, or dissent, often in opposition to something a person is powerless to prevent or avoid. A protest against increased taxation, for example. As a verb used with an object and therefore transitive, to make a protest or remonstrate against, object to, and used without an object, therefore intransitively, to give manifest expression to, objection, or disapproval, remonstrate. So, now that we have some basics in place, let's explore a model for developing our understanding of the concept of protest. You see, protest doesn't occur in isolation. In fact, it has a past and future to go with its present. In this model, you will see those three dimensions represented, and this will help you to broaden your thinking and then to expand your vocabulary. Let's start by looking at the three key circles: context, protest, outcome. As a next and very straightforward step, we can add a word to each of them that helps expand our understanding. For context, we can add deficit, which means that something is lacking. This might be something that has never been provided but is desired, something that has been possessed but then taken away, or something that should happen to address a lack or shortcoming. Next, we have the word protest itself. This, of course, is a form of action which is meant to address or rectify the deficit, to get back what was lost, to obtain what is desired or promised, or to fix whatever is perceived as being broken or inadequate. Actions spark reactions, as we know, and these become the consequences of our actions. Basically, there are three possible categories here. Protest results in no obvious change. Protest worsens the situation and increases the original deficit, or protest achieves its goals. Now, to write about protest in an articulate and informed way, we need the language and the vocabulary of these categories. Let's go back to context and the idea of deficit. What are the categories of things people protest about? Well, in a broad sense, they include enslavement, deprivation, disenfranchisement, silencing, suppression, dispossession, dislocation, dehumanization, poverty, violence, injustice, persecution, torture, legislation, and marginalization. And what are the types of causes people protest about? Well, let's take social justice. This encompasses a broad spectrum of issues such as racial inequality, LGBTQ rights, gender equality, and indigenous rights. Human rights. Protests here may focus on violations of human rights both domestically and internationally, including issues such as torture, freedom of speech, and refugee rights. Environmental concerns. People protest against environmental degradation, climate change, deforestation, pollution, and the exploitation of natural resources. Political issues. This includes protests against government policies, corruption, authoritarianism, electoral fraud, and lack of political representation. Economic injustice. Protests often target economic disparities, labor rights, austerity measures, unemployment, and issues related to poverty. War and conflict. Anti-war protests oppose military intervention, arms sales, and conflicts perceived as unjust or unnecessary. Healthcare and education. Protests may arise around issues such as access to healthcare, education funding, student debt, and educational reforms. Civil liberties. People may protest against infringements on civil liberties, including surveillance, censorship, and infringements on privacy rights. Animal rights. Animal rights activists protest against animal cruelty, exploitation in industries such as factory farming and animal testing, and advocate for animal welfare laws. Let's move now to protest itself and the idea of action. What forms can protest take? Well, marches and rallies. Peaceful gatherings of people in public spaces, often with signs, banners and chants to express their views or demands. Sit-ins and occupations. Participants occupy a public space, building or institution to draw attention to their cause and disrupt normal operations. Boycotts. People refrain from purchasing goods or using services from specific companies or industries to protest their practices or policies. Strikes. Workers collectively stop working to demand better wages, working conditions, or other labour-related issues. Civil disobedience. Deliberate violation of laws, regulations, or orders to challenge perceived injustices or protest government actions. This can include acts such as blocking traffic, trespassing, or refusing to cooperate with authorities. Petitions. Collecting signatures or support online or in person to demonstrate the level of public concern or support for a particular issue. Artistic protests. Using art, music, theatre, or other forms of creative expression to convey a message or provoke thought about social or political issues. Digital activism. Using social media, online petitions, hacking, or other digital platforms to organise protests, raise awareness, or coordinate action. Community organising. Building grassroots movements and networks within communities to address local issues or support broader causes. Legal action. Filing lawsuits or legal challenges to protest specific laws, policies, or government actions. And what are some other words for protesters? Activists, agitators, demonstrators, marchers, dissenters, rebels, advocates, participants, opposition, opponents, representatives, troublemakers. When you are thinking over these words, it's good to give some thought as to the connotations of each of them and to ask yourself how they might affect the tone of your writing. Remember too that protest is action with a target or targets. Who or what might these be? Let's start with government. Protesters may target government institutions, officials, or policies when they perceive governmental actions or inactions as unjust or detrimental to the interests of the people. Corporations. Large corporations or specific industries may be targeted to protest against practices seen as unethical, exploitative, harmful to the environment, or detrimental to workers' rights. Institutions. Protesters may target institutions such as banks, universities, or religious organizations to challenge their policies, practices, or influence on society. International bodies. Protest actions may target international organizations such as the United Nations or World Trade Organization to protest against global policies or decisions perceived as unjust or harmful. Law enforcement. In cases of perceived police brutality, discrimination, or abuse of power, protesters may target law enforcement agencies or individual officers. Political parties or figures. Protest actions may target specific political parties, politicians, or public figures to express dissatisfaction with their actions, policies, or ideologies. Media outlets. Protesters may target media organizations to challenge biased reporting, censorship, or the spread of misinformation. Specific policies or legislation. Protest actions may target specific laws, regulations, or policies that are deemed unjust, discriminatory, or harmful. Social norms or cultural practices. In cases where protesters aim to challenge societal norms or cultural practices, their targets may include traditional institutions or practices that perpetuate inequality or oppression. Then we come to the third cycle, outcome. What can happen as a result of a protest? Well, not much in some cases. The status quo might be maintained and there may be no appreciable change. Or there could be policy change. Protesters can influence policymakers to enact new laws or change existing ones in response to the demands of the protesters. This could include reforms related to social justice, civil rights, environmental protection, or other issues. Public awareness and education. Protests can raise awareness about a particular issue, drawing attention to injustices or grievances that might otherwise go unnoticed. This increased awareness can lead to public discourse and debate, fostering a better understanding of the issue among the general population. Political pressure. Protests can exert pressure on government officials and institutions to take action on certain issues. Elected representatives may feel compelled to respond to the concerns of their constituents or risk facing electoral consequences. Solidarity and unity. Protests can bring together diverse groups of people who share common goals or concerns, fostering a sense of solidarity and community among participants. This unity can strengthen movements and increase their effectiveness in advocating for change. Confrontation and repression. In some cases, protests may be met with resistance or repression from authorities, leading to violent confrontations, arrests, or other forms of suppression. This can escalate tensions and undermine the goals of the protest movement. Media attention. Protests often attract media coverage, which can amplify the message of the protesters and reach a broader audience. However, media coverage can also shape public perceptions of the protest and influence the narrative surrounding it in a negative direction. Electoral impact. Protests can take down or put in office political parties or candidates. Long-term social change. While the immediate impact of a protest may be limited, it can contribute to broader social and cultural shifts over time. Protests can challenge existing power structures, norms, and values, paving the way for lasting change. Try to keep this model in mind to remind yourself that protest is part of a dynamic that includes a context and outcomes. When you choose a form in which to write and begin the creative process, you now have a language and a conceptual framework for getting started. Thanks for asking the doctor about writing about protest.